I can't put it down, it's my new addiction. It's all in my head, but I want non-fiction. I don't like the world, but I like fantasy. Fairies, fucking girls, and they're pretty. Highly, do you like to read? I wrote this so you'd sleep with me. It's like 199 degrees when I go to the smart hut. Go to the smart hut. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. All this filth I've gotta read. Mass men crossing boundaries brings me to my fucking knees. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. Throbbing, swelling, pulsing pain. Big fat tits stick in between. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. Draco fucked Hermione. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. Draco fucked Hermione. I wake up alone staring at my ceiling. I try not to care, so I just start reading. Sits in the cup chair, he watches me finish. He just likes to stare, and my god, he's British. Jobs to satisfy his needs. Those man bets I just wanna squeeze. Feels like I'm gonna sneeze. Squid isn't pee-pee, won't somebody breed me? S-M-U-T-H-U-T. All this filth I've gotta read. Mass men crossing boundaries brings me to my fucking knees. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. Throbbing, swelling, pulsing pain. Big fat tits stick in between. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. Draco fucked Hermione. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. Draco fucked Hermione. Yes, he did. He fucked her real nice. Yes, he did. He fucked her twice. Yes, he did. He fucked her a lot. He fucked in the shed and he fucked in the smart hut, babe. Sorry about that.
That is the, first of all, you guys spamming Smut Hut like that was filling me with so much joy that I actually copy and pasted it. I'm going to make a thing for the main screen. Sorry for anyone watching on YouTube, but hold on, this is important. I'm going to do a thing on the main screen so we could see you guys spamming all your Smut Huts because that was amazing. I'm going to put the emotes on the main screen because I am obsessed. Oh my God. Ah, that's such a good way to start the Smut Hut. I'm so excited. That got me so, oh my God. And again, shout out to Emma. Thank you so much, Emma. That is our intro from Emma Graceless. It's so beautiful. So welcome to the Smut Hut. Let me just say that this it's sort of interesting that that song is so good and then we're about to read just like really sad stuff. But that's okay. So welcome in everybody to our Smutty Saturday. I'm so happy to have all you poops. If you're watching on YouTube, we love you, YouTube. If you're watching right now, we love you too, obviously. Sorry, Mom. And then I love it so, Carly, it's so good. Please tell me the song we put on YouTube. Honestly, Darius, I really think we should. It's such a wonderful intro and it's gonna be perfect for any Smut Hut we read. Like, I have other Draco and Hermione fanfics I might read to you in the future. I have other, it's so perfect for the Smut Hut. So anyways, welcome in if you are here now. We're about to start this episode of the Smut Hut. And by the way, excuse me. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. Oh my God. I want to take my hair down. So thank you, Carly. Before we get going, before we start with the Manacled Ussy, hold on. Oh my God. So, before super professional, I want to take my hair out because I'm getting a freaking headache. Okay, so it was so tight. My ball, you saw how tight that ball sack was? I could barely get it out. All right, welcome to this episode of the Smut Hut. Before we begin, a reminder: Manacled is a fan fiction dark romance surrounding Draco and Hermione from Harry Potter. The trigger warnings are extensive, so please be warned. Viewer discretion is heavily advised. The trigger warnings are rape, mutilation, forced marriage, degradation, forced breeding, death, war, and suicide. Again, not everyone's cup of tea. Viewers very much advised, but if you're still in it with us, we are going to do our recap of what has been going on because things are starting to get hot and heavy over here. And then we are going to read chapters 41, 42, and 43 today. And then next Smutty Saturday, we're going to be starting at 44. Anyways, so what has been happening in the world of Manacled? So, again, it's hard to summarize now. We're really deep into volume 2, so I'll do my best. There's a lot going on. For anyone who is unfamiliar with this story, the premise of the story really takes place in a world where if Harry Potter were written for adults, not for children, what would the story be like? And the reality is, I think you guys are slowly seeing that this is probably what would happen. The good guys would not prevail just because the good guys are supposed to prevail. The reality is the good guys aren't willing to do the hard decisions that Hermione herself is desperately trying to get them to do. So what's ending up happening is the good guys are losing big time in the war against Voldemort, and the Order of Phoenix is taking blow after blow after blow. This series starts in an interesting way because volume 1 takes place in a world where the good guys already lost. Harry is defeated. Voldemort has taken over. He's taken over most of Wizarding Europe. The good guys are either dead, being held captive and tortured, or they were put into a breeding program, which is where we find our Hermione, who was left in sensory deprivation for 16 months. During that time, she occluded which is a magical word for protected some of her very precious memories, which are the ones we are reading about, if you guys haven't put that together yet. So, you obviously, but it's not obvious, but maybe it is. It's slowly becoming obvious. But during her time in isolation, she occluded and protected a bunch of memories after the war was lost. And even she protected them from herself. She couldn't even remember what she was protecting. We start our journey with Hermione is pulled out of essentially torture, where she hasn't seen anyone or talked to anybody. She has manacles on her wrists that are magical, that absorb magical powers anytime she tries to use magic. She is put into a breeding program, and that breeding program, think Handmaid's Tale, she is assigned to somebody named the High Reeve. The High Reeve, we find out, is Draco Malfoy, who's become the right hand to Voldemort. During that time, he is forced to use legamins, which is a type of magical brain reading on her to try to find out what she's hiding. We don't know what she's hiding because we are living through Hermione's POV, and she doesn't know what she's hiding. But we know that Draco does, right? Because if you think about what's going on in volume 2, right? So just dropping a little crumblets for you. Anyways, so during that time, Hermione has a rough fucking time. Hermione is raped. Malfoy does rape her during her fertile window. During that time, Hermione is also abused. Like, it's just a terrible time. Basically, the point is that the doctor, who's an asshole, was like, if she gets pregnant, we think the magical pregnancy will like bust open all of her memories. And that's where we're at. So the final of volume 1, obviously there's a lot more that goes into it, but volume 1 ends where Hermione is pregnant. Her and Draco's baby is so magical and so powerful that her memories bust open like a sieve. And now we are in the flashback stage. During this flashback stage, which is volume 2, we are seeing that Hermione and Draco is a turncoat. Draco is being a double agent, a la like Snape, and we still don't know his motivations for why he all of a sudden flipped and is no longer wanting to be on Voldemort's side, and he wants to help the Order of the Phoenix win, which he is actually doing. So he's giving them vital, pivotal information that is saving lives in the Order of Phoenix and is starting to turn the tide of war. During that time, he's punished egregiously by Voldemort. Voldemort doesn't know he's a spy, but he knows that stuff is going awry, and he's blaming it on Draco. And what he does is he puts a magical blood magic spell in runes all over Draco's back that are so deeply embedded they go to his bone and they emanate dark magic. Hermione uses an amulet, which we don't know the full story on the amulet yet, but she basically takes this magical amulet that she wears on her neck, she cracks it and puts it into Draco. And after she does that, she slowly heals these runes that are all over his back, slowly and carefully. And during that time, Draco and Hermione are like two vipers, both waiting for each other to snap at each other. Neither one of them really understand each other's intentions fully. We're still living through the guise of Hermione's life. So we're seeing her feeling isolated and alone. She realizes that Draco is isolated and alone, and she realizes she can manipulate that. She can use that if he's isolated and alone, she can make him feel something for her. So we see her utilizing her empathy as her greatest weapon. And Draco's greatest weapon is that he is a living weapon, essentially. And he, for whatever reason, really, really wants to keep Hermione safe. Like, he literally takes on an alpha werewolf because it attacked her while she was foraging. And we're like, why? She doesn't understand why. But then things got really steamy last chapters where they got drunk together. And while they got drunk together, they both sort of, what alcohol does, it lowers your inhibitions, and for both of them it lowered their inhibitions, and they had their first genuinely, it's still complicated but seemingly romantic thing. The store, it's exclamation store Ocean Breeze if you're looking for it. She got beer goggles, but I think it was more than that. I think the alcohol allowed Hermione and Draco to both feel anything. Hermione is so consumed with keeping her shit together because she is the primary and singular force that is keeping the Order of Phoenix together and alive, whether they appreciate her or not. She saved Ginny's life. She saved all their lives, and they don't appreciate her, and they isolate her, and they make her feel alone and like almost like she's this terrible person because she's willing to do the hard stuff to win. So I think alcohol allowed her to feel like she doesn't have to keep up this ruse, that she's not lonely, and she doesn't long to be part of something bigger than her and feel appreciated and loved and adored, and somebody actually wants her around and wants her. And I think Draco, we don't know why he would get drunk with her, why he would trust her so much to get drunk. We still don't know what he's running from, what he's hiding from, but we know that when he got drunk, he also was like, let's go. I think it's an important thing that also he asked for consent before they kissed, which I think is like a really important thing, because you see him kind of overpowering her in all these other moments where he's standing over her, he's looming over her, and he has power because he has in some ways privacy, right? Like in some ways he has privacy. We don't know his motivations, but he knows Hermione's motivations. She's an open book. She doesn't really hide any of her motivations, you know? She's hiding that she's manipulating him, but I think even he knows deep down, right? So he asked for consent, and then she kisses him, and then they start fooling around a little bit. And then Hermione gets slammed with that feeling of like, he doesn't even really want you, which I think is an insecurity stemming from, honestly, a place that isn't necessarily derived from Draco. I think it's from a different insecurity. And so she pulls away, he feels it, and then the instance ends. But it changed everything. That moment of them feeling intimate and actually vulnerable and wanting each other, yearning for each other, being eager for each other, it changes things. So that's where we left off. So I'm very excited. Make it sound like it's a cup of tea, who's sticking around. Oh God, this is going to ruin Harry Potter. Oh, Bagel, it's going to, if I can be honest, Bagel, I think Manacled will ruin Harry Potter for you, but it will also make it better than you could have ever imagined. It is an incredible story. It is beautiful. It's complex. It's dark. It's brutal, but it is so good, and it's better than the original series. So we are deep in this now. It's a brutal, harsh world. Hermione is so brave. I completely agree. Past episodes are on YouTube. Thank you so much, Carly. Someone teach me how to spell. It's Hermione. You're fine. All these weeks I've been spelling it wrong. Emma Song made me realize you learn something every day. Yeah, Draco is being played like a pawn. He's being played by like a pawn in a few different people's plans is a great thing to say out. I completely agree. So yes, Hermione is pregnant in volume 1. All of volume 2 is a flashback. We are seeing what led up to volume 1. That's very important, and I think I got a couple DMs about that. Just to clarify before we begin, all of volume 2 is actually in the timeline, all takes place prior to volume 1. But because we're going through this world through Hermione's POV, we are starting the story where she starts, which is at the bottom of Hogwarts, 16 months in isolation with no memory of what the fuck is going on. So that's why it's almost like this story is sort of warps itself, and it's so beautiful, and it makes you work for it. It's great. All right, so here we go. So you're asking if the story is PG. This story is not PG. This story is the opposite of PG. Okay, so let us begin. So Chapter 41, flashback. Chapter 41, flashback 16. So I have a mind dump of all my thoughts, but I can never try to get it all. It's very hard to try to encapsulate Manacled. Don't worry, Darius. I know. All right, here we go, guys. Chapter 41, flashback 16. August 2002. Hermione pressed her lips together as she stared over at Draco, breathing raggedly. I'm too drunk. I can't apparate, she said. I told you, I cry. I can't help it. I don't know how to hold it all in when I'm drunk. She clamped her hands over her mouth and struggled not to burst into tears. They leaked out of her eyes and slid over her fingers. Draco sighed. Why are you crying now? He asked when she kept choking back tears. Because I'm lonely and I'm snogging you and you don't even really think I'm attractive, she admitted tearfully. Draco looked at her for a moment and then tilted his head back and stared up at the ceiling for a full minute. Why do you think I'm snogging you? He finally asked in a tight voice. The corner of Hermione's mouth twitched and she looked away. Because I'm here? She said quietly. Why were you snogging me? He asked, looking away from the ceiling to stare at her. Hermione studied a knot in a floorboard and twisted a curl in her hands. Because you treat me like I'm me. My friends treat me like a colleague, she said in a bitter tone. Harry and I got into a fight, and then he apologized for insulting me professionally. Like that was the part that hurt me. Somehow, you make me remember that underneath everything I've become in this war, the person I was before still exists. I'm gonna cry. Oh, I love her. She bit her lip as she tried not to start crying again. She snatched the bottle off the floor where it had been abandoned at some point and gulped more of the remaining fire whiskey. There was less than an inch left, and she had a lingering hope that if she finished all of it, it would take her to a point of inebriation beyond feeling. Malfoy looked away from her and then leaned back and slung his arm over his eyes. When she had finished the bottle of Odgins, she glanced over at him. His arm had slumped down. He was asleep. She stared at him for a long time, studying his features in a way she had never permitted herself to in the past. Then, gradually, she found her eyelids closing. She couldn't quite think, but she should do something. Get up, or perhaps conjure a cot somewhere. Her sight grew dim, and she fell asleep staring at him. She didn't know which of them moved, but when they stirred the next morning, they were half entwined with each other. Somehow, neither of them had fallen off the small couch. They'd slumped down and burrowed into each other's arms. If Hermione's head hadn't fallen on the verge of cracking open, she would have tried to rapidly remove herself. But instead, she just lay trapped under Draco in a state of stunned horror. His expression showed similar horror and almost panic when he went from asleep to abruptly awake. He tried to pull his arm out from under her, and then they wobbled precariously on the edge of the couch. If you make me fall off this couch, I will vomit on you, Hermione immediately told him. He stilled, and they stared at each other. Any ingenious solutions then, know-it-all? He finally asked. Give me a minute, Hermione said, flushing deep scarlet and closing her eyes as she tried to think of a solution. She was resolutely ignoring Draco lying on top of her. Draco, who was shirtless. The air in the room was cold, but his skin was warm and his breath ghosted against her cheek was hot. His whole body was hard and pressed snugly against hers. His arm under her back making her arch into him. There was something distinct and growing pressed into her thigh near her hip, and after a moment's bewilderment, she felt it twitch faintly. Oh God! She wasn't thinking about it. She hadn't noticed anything. She was thinking only of her hangover and how to disentangle herself from Draco without either of them vomiting on the other person. Draco was on top of her with all of his weight, but his arm closest to the edge of the couch was wrapped around her waist past his elbow. When he tried to move it out from under her, Their combined weight risked destabilizing them to the point of toppling them both off the love seat. If he could get his other arm free, he could grab the back of the couch and free himself. But when he tried to move his shoulder, it also resulted in wobbling. If he could move his legs off the couch first, then he could kneel on the floor and easily get free. But the process, Hermione suspected, would result in a great deal of waist-level friction. I think if I move my left leg, Draco started to say. Don't! Hermione barked, feeling her face grow redder. Fuck, Granger, don't shout, he said, angrily wincing. Just let me think, Hermione said, wishing bitterly that she had fallen asleep on the floor. Fucking unbelievable, he muttered under his breath. Irritation kindled inside of her chest alongside her embarrassment over their current predicament. Don't blame me. I wanted to go home last night. You're the one who blocked the door and demanded I drink with you, Hermione said in a sharp tone. I was drunk, per your suggestion, as supposed medical professional, I might add. His expression was disdainful. I apologize for recommending a source of pain relief while healing you, Hermione said, glaring up at him. If my help is such an inconvenience to you, you can always go elsewhere. I already intended to, he said coldly. Hermione's breath caught with a sharp hurt, and she stiffened and then buckled under him sharply. He lost his balance and toppled, and she sat up quickly to avoid being taken with him. He hit his head with a resounding crack on the wood floor. You are a fucking bitch, he said as he gripped his face. Hermione sneered down at him as he stood up. Yes, I think that's pretty well established now, she said, pressing her lips into a hard line as she snatched up her satchel and pulled the door open. If you have any useful information, leave a scroll. I'll pick it up later, she said, stepping through and apparating before he could say anything in reply. The moment she reappeared down the street from number 13 Grimald's Place, she proceeded to double over and vomit into a hedge. After she'd banished the mess and wiped her mouth, she rummaged through her satchel and pulled out the vial of hangover relief potion she had remembered to pack for Draco the night before. She swallowed the potion and her mouth twisted slightly as she stood in the empty street and tried not to cry as she reviewed the previous night from a perspective of sobriety. She'd kissed Draco Malfoy. More than kissed him. Snogged him. Willingly. She'd never kissed anyone but Victor Crumb during 4th year. But that wasn't what bothered her. As she stood in the empty street, twisting the strap of her satchel, she'd feared she'd compromised her mission. Draco had handed himself to her. He'd asked for her company, and he'd wanted to kiss her. She had blown it by being drunk and vulnerable and insecure. She wasn't sure whether having sex with him would have been the right move, but she hadn't derailed their snogging session with any calculation or strategy on her part. She'd balked, and he'd seen it. Willing. He'd been specific about that. The moment she hesitated, he'd shoved her back beyond his walls. She hadn't even been thinking about her mission. He touched her hair and told her she was lovely. He had seemed so sad for her and had made her want to kiss him. If the alcohol hadn't made her so insecure, she probably would have had sex with him. She hadn't known that being touched by someone could feel meaningful like that hearing him groan and react to her touch would affect something deep inside of her. Theoretically, she understood sex and romantic relationships. But practically, personally speaking, she found herself so beyond her depth as she felt as though she'd been dropped down into a deep sea chasm. There had never been time nor opportunity for any kind of relationship. Not when she'd been training abroad, not when she came back. Most people her age didn't even have clearance to access her when she was working on research or potions, and visiting was carefully regulated in the hospital. By the time most patients were recovered enough to notice her, they were transferred out of her hospital to a convalescent ward or hospice house. There simply had never been the time. She had watched Ron and his cycle of partners and assumed that sex was impersonal, just something comforting and physical, that it was easy to be with someone and then walk away and not care if they proceeded to find someone else the very next day. Sorry, I'm like fussing with myself, sorry. My hair feels so heavy. She thought that if the step was ever taken with Malfoy, she'd be able to be indifferent. That it wouldn't have to be personal if she were simply rational enough. Lie back and think of England. Women had done that for hundreds of years. She had been wrong. Kissing Draco and being touched by him had felt like the most personal thing that had ever happened to her. It had awakened a longing somewhere deep inside of her. As she stood alone in the street, she found herself wishing to re-experience it. It had felt sacred. It hadn't been something strategic or impersonal. It had been her reaching out and kissing someone who was interested in her, who had felt kindred in loneliness. Someone who understood the dark world she had descended into, who wasn't angry at her for wanting to win the war at any cost. She wanted it to mean as much to him. The knowledge that it probably didn't fractured something inside of her. He was probably like Ron. It was probably just something physical. The fact that it couldn't be that way for her felt cruelly unjust. The fact that she still craved it anyway felt like the worst part of all. She felt empty. She felt physically and emotionally betrayed by herself. She never wanted to go near Draco again. She felt like seeing him would hurt every time. Death Eater, murderer, spy, target, tool. Yet she wanted him to touch her. To lace his fingers in her hair, slide his hands along her body, and feel him grasp against her lips as she kissed him back. She never wanted such a thing before, and she didn't know how to ignore it now that it existed. She didn't know how to make it stop. It wasn't a longing in her mind that she could occlude. It was somewhere deeper. But it didn't matter. It didn't matter if she never wanted to see him again. It didn't matter how she felt. It had never mattered how she felt. The instructions remained the same. Hold his interest, make him loyal. She swallowed down the bitter aftertaste of the potion and her vomit and headed back into Grimmauld Place. It means it's important. Carly, when I go like this, it means important. Bloody hell, Hermione, Ron said as she walked in the door. He was in the sitting room with the insomniacs. She stared at him, puzzled. What happened to your hair? He asked. She reached up and felt it all tangled around her. Brambles, she lied promptly. You look like you've lost a fight with a Kniezel, Ron said in a teasing tone. Hermione nodded absently. I'd forgotten it was like that. Ron, after staring at her for another minute. It's pretty. Oh, sorry. He said that. I'd forgotten it was like that, Ron added after staring at her for another minute. It's pretty, the way you keep it now. Hermione smiled wanly at him and felt her jaw tremble faintly. Yes, it's best when I keep it back, she said. I hardly know what to do with it when it's like this now. She didn't want to talk to anyone. She especially didn't want to talk about her hair. She hurried up the stairs to a bathroom and took a shower. She scrubbed herself violently, trying to wash away any physical memory of Draco's hands. The water was scalding, and she couldn't bring herself to turn it off. When she was done washing, she continued to stand there as the minutes rolled by, wasting time she didn't have. She wasn't crying, she told herself. It was just the spray of the shower. It was just water on her face. She barely toweled her hair off at all before quickly braiding it into two taut French braids, which she coiled at the nape of her neck. Neat. Not a stray curl to be seen. She was taking a potion inventory when Kingsley found her. Granger, you're needed at a shell cottage, he said. Hermione froze for a moment before turning and drawing a rune in a very nondescript chest lying on the floor. It popped open and she pulled out a small leather bag. She lifted the flap and took a rapid visual inventory. I'm ready, she said, trying to quell the rapid beat of her heart and the cold, knotting sensation in her stomach. Kingsley led her through Grimmauld Place and then apparated from the front door. They did not reappear at Shell Cottage. Hermione had known they would not. They stood at the opening of a narrow cave. Kingsley went over and tapped on a large boulder beside the cave opening. The ground at Hermione's feet swirled and a staircase descending into the ground appeared. She stared down at it for a moment, pressing her lips together before starting down. At the bottom of the stairs stood Gabrielle Delacour, looking ethereally beautiful. "Hermione, I've caught another," she announced in triumph. "He is not marked, but I think he's important because he's being very difficult." Gabrielle had been a recent recruit to the British resistance, one of the few members of the French resistance who escaped into other parts of Europe when Voldemort had finally seized control of France. Gabrielle's friends and classmates had all died. She had arrived burning for revenge. Rather than formally induct her into the British resistance or the Order, Kingsley had swept Gabrielle into his secret reconnaissance team, a team even most of the members of the Order was largely ignorant of. Kingsley's recruits were scattered across Europe, gathering intelligence. They were mostly free agents. Kingsley left them with vague directions and great deal of leeway regarding what means they should use to extract the information. So long as the information was good, he made no move to rein in or question their methods. They were supposed to bring back their targets to be imprisoned. Hermione was called in to heal them before they were placed in suspended animation. Gabrielle was exceptionally talented at information gathering. She used her Vila allure and entrapped her targets somewhere she could interrogate them however she pleased. She also tended to bring back far more information than prisoners. Hermione suspected she killed most of her targets once she was done with them. There was a cold triumph in the French girl's eyes that spoke of pain both given and received. The beautiful young woman always wore long sleeves and covered herself carefully from the neck down. When Gabrielle did bring somebody back, it meant she hadn't been able to break them, in which case she'd resigned herself to leaving them to Kingsley and Moody's traditional interrogation methods: legitimacy, veritaserum, and psychological pressure. When Kingsley brought Hermione to the beach, she was never quite sure what would be waiting for her. She braced herself. She swung the door open and found a young man restrained in a chair. Small pools of blood sat on the floor beneath him. Hermione took a deep breath, placed her leather bag on the table, and opened it, pulling supplies out and laying them neatly across the table. When she had everything in place, she stepped closer and cast a diagnostic. Nothing severe, nothing that could kill him. Lots of small injuries in areas with a large quantity of nerves. They were concentrated on his hands. Hermione swallowed. And genitalia. He was conscious, but ignoring Hermione, which was normal. Hermione's job was to heal him before Kingsley interrogated him. It wasn't a courtesy so much as an added screw to twist in while the prisoner fretted over what was to come. Occasionally, the dread was enough that they snapped while she was working and started offering their information to Hermione. The first time Hermione had been brought in and discovered that the Order was tactily permitting torture, she had been enraged. There was a profound difference between using dark arts in self-defense and torturing someone. Agreeing to heal those prisoners meant she was enabling it. Kingsley was unmoved by her conscience. There was no one else with clearance within the Order who had the skills to do it. If Hermione wouldn't heal them, the prisoners would be left in whatever condition they were in when he dosed them with a draught of living death, leaving them maimed in suspended animation. She had tried repeatedly to dissuade Kingsley from giving the recruits such free rein. She offered to brew more veritaserum. He had stared at her and replied that the reconnaissance members didn't want veritaserum, they wanted revenge. By recruiting them, he was simply channeling it as efficiently as he could. The Order needed spies who were willing to do whatever it took. They couldn't send in people who might balk or hold back at a crucial moment. He reminded her that they needed the information and that what happened to the resistance members caught by Death Eaters was worse. As though Hermione needed to be reminded, she was the one who had healed what was left of those prisoners. But she felt like a monster each time she was brought in to heal someone caught by the reconnaissance team, wondering whether she was enabling future victims by cooperating. Even if they were Death Eaters, wanting them dead on a battlefield was different from letting them be tortured. I'm going to fix your hands first, she said softly to the man. She knelt down beside him, then lightly placed her hand under his right hand and lifted it into the light. With a quick spell, she aerolized a potion and guided the mist around the fingers and thumb. There had been needles driven under the nail beds repeatedly. When the skin had absorbed the potion, she lightly took the hand in hers and began performing the spells to repair the tissue damage. She had worked across 3 fingers when he spoke. I know you, he said, raising his head. She glanced up. He looked vaguely familiar. Solidly bulk, dark-haired, with thick stubble. His arms and hands were hairy. You're Potter's mudblood bitch, he said. Hermione raised an eyebrow and continued on to the next finger. You certainly grew up, he said with a leer. I would never have thought a frizz head like you would have ended up looking like that. Hermione ignored him. Granger, isn't it? I'll have to tell everyone I saw you. We thought you were dead. He leaned forward until his face was unnervingly close to Hermione's. I'm going to tell you a secret, mudblood, he muttered. You are going to lose this war. And when you do, I'm going to kill the blonde bitch out there so slowly she'll beg me for it. Hermione continued to ignore him as she closed the razor-fine lacerations that had been cut into his palms. She finished with his first hand and then started on the second. She dreaded the thought of finishing, but eventually there was no more work left to do on his hands, and she could avoid it no longer. I'll need you to sit back if you want me to heal what has been done to your genitals, she forced herself to say steadily. Her whole body felt cold. Her stomach twisted so painfully she wondered if she'd ever been able to digest food ever again. He leaned back in the chair he was restrained in and opened his knees. His expression was taunting, as though he was the one within the power. She wanted to stun him. She was supposed to leave them conscious when she healed them. It was part of the psychology that Kingsley employed. She flicked her wand to perform an unbuttoning charm, then reached out and opened his trousers. Gabrielle had used some kind of fine blade to carve words into the shaft of his penis. Hermione couldn't read the French through the ragged incisions and blood. She had a brief moment of gratitude that they weren't runes. Then she got to work. She was determined to try not to touch him, which made the wand work even more elaborate. She banished the blood and cast a mild cleansing charm. The young man moaned in pain for the first time. Then she siphoned out essence of murtlap from a vial and applied it magically. It was less precise and gentle, but Hermione refused to let herself care. Hermione murmured the necessary healing charms and cast a second diagnostic. He had a lot of alcohol in his system. It was probably part of how Gabrielle had gotten close. Hermione pulled out a sobriety potion and poured it down his throat. He recognized the potion because he didn't struggle the way she expected him to. Then she stepped back and appraised him. He stared up at her as he reached into her bag. He stared up at her as she reached into her bag and pulled out a hangover relief potion and offered it to him. After he swallowed it, he sneered at her. Patching me up for round 2, he guessed. And here I thought you were all bleeding hearts with no kill policy. Hermione gave him a thin smile she had learned from Malfoy. We're not going to kill you. Then she turned on her heel and walked out. As the door shut behind her, she stood for a moment, collecting herself. She felt like a fucking bitch. She had lied to Malfoy the first time she'd been drunk. She had no shreds of decency left. The war had ripped them all away. The only thing she had left was her determination to save Ron and Harry, to win the war. She would climb over tortured bodies, sell herself, and tear out Draco Malfoy's heart if it was required to achieve it. When her friends were safe, she would stand quietly beside Kingsley and Moody and swallow her damnation without a murmur. That is the final chapter to chapter 41. Remember that chapter. That's all I'm going to say. Remember. This means pay attention. This is important. So if I do that, that's what that means. It's important. I assume no. I imagine our generation are getting all the rights, holding control. What? Let me, okay, so, welcome in, Ashley. Addie, Gabrielle does not mess around. No, she does not. Final chapter. That was final chapter to 41. We are going to begin chapter 42. Remember that interaction she had with that prisoner. That's all I'm going to say. Chapter 42. Flashback 17. So now I can start again. Flashback 17, August 2002. August is a big month. Okay, problem is I'm not always watching when I listen. That's okay, Carly. It's all important, but don't worry. If I do that, it means uber important, but it's all really important. Chapter 42, Flashback 17, August 2002. Hermione sat on a rock on the beach while she waited for Kingsley to call her back to administer the Drought of Living Death. As she sat, she kept replaying the previous night over and over, looking for anything she might have missed. She had concluded upon further review of the night that Draco was attracted to her at some level. Like, duh. After all, he had called her lovely, compared her to a rose in a garden, and claimed he was blindsided by her. She snorted faintly and wondered if he would ever have admitted such a thing if he hadn't been on his third bottle of fire whiskey. He lacked intimacy in his life. Whether or not she met his general standards for physical appeal, he was emotionally vulnerable to her. She had also determined that it was probably for the best that they hadn't had sex. His current interest was like a kindling flame. Too much fuel and she'd smother it. Now it seemed undeniable that she had his attention. She'd have to move cautiously. The key would lie in carefully cultivating it into something uncontrollable for him, something he couldn't stop himself from wanting more than anything else. It would take time. Draco was patient. He was willing to lie and manipulate and murder and climb as far as necessary to get what he wanted. The revenge, atonement, or whatever his alliance with the Order was based on was something he was willing to wait to get. He'd suffer and sacrifice for as long as it took. To try to direct his ambition and insidiously obsessive nature toward herself was a terrifying task. As Severus had said, she was likely to destroy the Order as save it. She could feel herself panicking at the thought. Her chest tightened, and it felt as though the ocean wind was stealing her breath. She dropped her head between her knees and forced herself to inhale slowly. She could do it. She could do it because she had to do it, because there was no other way to win the war. The very notion of being able to control him had felt delusional and theoretical up until then. The idea that she could buy the war with her emotional intimacy had seemed fundamentally absurd until she felt herself dipped into the deep undercurrent of Malfoy's unrestrained attention. He was so controlled, even when drunk, even when he had kissed her. He hadn't rushed or been overeager. His passion hadn't been explosive. It was a smoldering fire, the kind that grew secretly, like a ground fire deep in the earth, spreading and waiting before rising up, destroying the world above. She suspected he burned for things more deeply than even he was aware of. She laid out her campaign carefully in her mind. He would be more careful the next time he saw her. He would probably try to force her away and recreate the distance. Perhaps that would play to Hermione's advantage. After all, there was no greater temptation than the forbidden fruit. The more he was thinking about her, about being careful around her, about how he shouldn't have her, the more she'd consume him. The more he'd want her. The fact that she wanted him back? Hermione swallowed and nibbled nervously on her thumbnail. She would use that too. If the tension was real on both sides, it would make him harder for him to resist. She didn't know how to fake it anyways. She was too inexperienced. The sense of longing she felt would be included in her repertoire. She smiled bitterly to herself. She'd prostitute her soul to win the war. Using her feelings as currency should be even easier. Should be. Somehow, rationalizing things didn't always stop them from hurting Somehow, rationalizing things didn't always stop them from hurting. The sharp sound of crunching rocks caught her attention. She turned and found Bill approaching. Kingsley sent me to find you. He's finished, Bill said. Hermione stared up at him. The war had aged the oldest Weasley boy. The jaunty, cool curse breaker had been ground down into a hard and pensive-looking man. Bill had been the one on a mission when Arthur had been cursed. The guilt had smothered something in him. He was cold and reliable and mechanical in his work, and his work was all he did. Hermione consulted with him sometimes over curse research. There was never any small talk, no jokes or offhanded remarks. Even Severus was more of a conversationalist. Hermione stood and followed him. As they walked down the beach, Bill abruptly stopped and looked at her. Hermione waited. Gabrielle? Bill started and then hesitated. Fleur's worried. Hermione didn't say anything. She had no idea what she could say about the girl. What exactly is she doing? Bill asked. She intercepts messengers that Tom sends to other parts of Europe, Hermione said carefully. I know that, but how? She hasn't told me. Hermione said, you'd have to ask her or Kingsley. I think she's fucking them, Bill said abruptly. His entire face seemed carved from stone. I think she fucks them, and then, when they're asleep, she ties them up and tortures them. Hermione pressed her lips together and didn't say anything. I don't know, Hermione finally said after a long pause. I only heal the targets brought in. I'm not informed about methods. Bill clenched his jaw visibly. A lot of healing? Hermione shifted and brushed at her nose. Nothing permanent, she said quietly. He stood silent for a moment before turning to continue on. Hermione followed him back to the staircase on the beach. The prisoner was still under the heavy influence of Veritas serum when she entered the room. He was slumped down in the chair with his head lolling to the side. Hermione walked over and cast a diagnostic charm on him. We're going to win the war. Going to win. You're all gonna die. All of you are gonna die. He was mumbling under his breath. Hermione examined the diagnostic and found that Kingsley had administered some kind of hallucinogenic along with the truth potion. She looked over sharply at the desk where Kingsley was writing down notes. The chemical reaction of those potions can cause permanent mania and obsessive behavior. The chemical reaction of those potions could cause permanent mania and obsessive behavior, she said in rebuke. You should have consulted me. Kingsley glanced up at her. I consulted with other potion masters, he said calmly. Interrogation is not your specialty. This one knew occlumency. He required additional measures. Hermione bit her tongue and turned back to the prisoner. His brain showed signs of extreme inflammation. She cursed under her breath and rummaged through her bag for something that might neutralize the effects. It was an unusual reaction. Without her full potion supply closet, she had limited options for counteracting it. A tincture of distilled billywig sting slime combined with a drop of syrup of hellebore would have a cooling effect on the brain, she concluded. She amalgamated them quickly in a vial and then tilted the prisoner's head back to administer it. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and when she touched the vial to his lips, he squeezed his eyes and mouth closed. Come on now, Hermione said gently. This will help your head. He cracked an eye open to peer at her for a moment before opening both. She watched his pupils suddenly dilated, and his gaze fastened on her intently. I remember you, he said. You're Potter's bitch. You need to take this or you're going to risk brain damage, Hermione said, unfazed. He parted his lips and downed the tincture and then hissed and shook his head slightly. Hermione recast a diagnostic and watched the inflammation rapidly fade away. She looked back at his face and saw his pupils had contracted into tiny dots in the center of his irises. His gaze was still fastened on Hermione in a way that grew quickly unnerving. How do you feel? She asked. Cold. My brain feels cold. My brain is cold. But the sight of you is warming the rest of me right up, he said in a vaguely sing-songy tone. He suddenly lunged forward, and his teeth snapped closed on air as Hermione stepped quickly back. He laughed. What do you think you are, a werewolf? She said sharply. The question was rhetorical. Diagnostic readings would indicate lycanthropy. He snickered. His expression was still dazed with Veritaserum, but his eyes remained fastened on Hermione. I'm not a werewolf, but I'm going to remember you, he said. When you lose this war, I'm going to remember you. I'm going to kill that blonde bitch, but I think I'll ask the Dark Lord if I can have you. He might want to keep you alive. I'll keep you alive. His eyes crawled over Hermione, and she shivered. She was coming to regret healing the brain inflammation. Something about the rapid way she'd counteracted the hallucinogenic appeared to have locked the obsessive tendency she worried about directly upon herself. That's enough, Montague! That's enough, Montague, Kingsley said sharply, standing up and walking over. Yeah. Hermione glanced over, finally recognizing the prisoner. He'd been a few years above her at Hogwarts. Graham Montague! Graham Montague! We have everything we needed from him, Kingsley said, gathering up several rolls of parchment. You can put him under. Hermione nodded and stunned Montague. His eyes were still fastened on her face as he slumped back. Yep. When the draught of living death was administered, Hermione handed Montague over to Bill and then headed back to Grimmauld Place. Draco had left no scroll of information when Hermione returned to the shack that evening. She stood there for several minutes, wondering if he'd show up to have her check the scar tissue. After 10 minutes of waiting, she left. She wasn't sure what it meant. It was possible there hadn't been any new intelligence, but she couldn't ease her fear that it was retribution for that morning. She tried not to let it stress her and reassured herself that if he'd had anything urgent, he would have mentioned it sooner. No longer needing to heal Draco each evening made her progress feel stalled. She found herself thinking about him often and not strategically. She wondered about how he was, whether the scars were irritating him. She kept reevaluating and reanalyzing their snog session and its aftermath until she felt as though she were a bit mad. The inconclusiveness of it grated on her mind. She found it difficult to focus on sleep that week. She had given up on using her room for sleeping. Harry and Ginny regularly occupied it for the entire night. Harry slept when he was with Ginny. He could actually sleep peacefully. The effect was dramatic. His mood stabilized in a way that it hadn't in years, and Hermione rarely encountered him in the sitting room at night. The stress that had been eroding him for years seemed to ease for the first time since Dumbledore's death. So sweet. Hermione took to sleeping in whatever empty bed she could find or in the training rooms. She kept exercising and building her stamina up dutifully. The next Tuesday, she was so stressed she took a calming draught before she apparated to the shack. She had no idea what Draco might do. When she arrived in the shack, she bounced on the balls of her feet while she stood waiting. Then she realized there was a scroll lying on the table. She stared at it for a moment before picking it up and unfurling it. Raids for the upcoming week. Counter curses. Nothing directed to Hermione. Not that she'd expected him to leave her a personal note. She sighed faintly and left. She didn't see him for the entire month of August. She fretted about it. The intentional silence between them gnawed at her. She kept reviewing what had happened, questioning her conclusions and drawing new ones. Maybe she ruined everything, or maybe he was avoiding her because he was so afraid of how she tempted him. She kept vacillating. Was it a good sign or a bad sign? The worst part was that she missed him. Daddy. The worst part was that she missed him. She hated to admit as much to herself, but she felt forced to acknowledge it. Treating his injury had become a significant aspect of her daily life. Interacting with him had become a significant aspect of her life. Having it so abruptly ended made her feel the absence keenly. She didn't have many people that she saw regularly. She kept replaying all their past interactions. She kept reevaluating him and his behavior. She was obsessing, but she didn't know what else to do. She needed him for the order. She had to obsess over him. It was her job. She didn't need to miss him, though, she told herself firmly. That was a personal failing. September rolled around, and he continued to simply leave scrolls without appearing. Hermione began to feel fractured. She didn't know what she was supposed to do. It was smart of him, of course. If she were in his shoes, it would probably be what she'd do. But it didn't solve the problem of what Hermione was supposed to do about it. She kept foraging and visiting the shack with increasingly dwindling hope. As Malfoy had warned her, larger and larger swaths of England's countryside had anti-apparition wards dropped over them. For weeks, Hermione tried to avoid the areas and forage elsewhere, but eventually the ward swallowed up all the areas she needed to forage in. She tried to find new spots, but she couldn't obtain sufficient quantities of certain crucial ingredients. When her Dittany supply ran out, she gave up and ventured into a warded forest. She cast all the detection spells she knew and stayed alert. She was harvesting her third, large bed of Dittany when the forest grew unnaturally quiet. She immediately stashed her supply and turned sharply, casting new detection spells in every direction. Nothing. But she trusted her instincts. Thank you for the raid. Max Strums, thank you for the raid. Welcome in, everybody. Hi. Guys, can you welcome in our raiders? Hello, radio. We are in the middle of reading smut. Welcome in. Thank you, Max, for the raid. Radio, thank you so much for the follow. She trusted her instincts. She was a good 100 feet from the edge of the anti-apparition zone. She headed for it calmly, trying not to betray her concern. She had her silver knife in one hand and her wand in the other as she picked her way carefully through the bracken. By the way, we are reading Manacled. Please read the trigger warning that Addie just pulled up. It's not going to be everyone's cup of tea. This is a dark romance taking place in the Harry Potter world. It's very intense, so it's not going to be everyone's cup of tea, but welcome to the Poop Coven. I'm happy to have you. Welcome in, Max. Thank you so much for the raid. She held her silver knife in one hand and her wand in the other as she picked her way carefully through the bracken. They waited until she was close enough to the edge of the ward to feel hopeful. Razor-sharp teeth suddenly sank into the back of her right leg. She screamed slightly and whirled to find a Gytrash had emerged from the darkness and slashed her calf open. "Lumos!" she snapped. The ghostly dog promptly released her leg and melted back into the darkness of the forest. Hermione didn't pause to check the injury. She raised her wand and looked for more creatures. I think it's like Gytrash, tended to run in packs. They also weren't typically aggressive towards adult humans. As she was turning around warily, something abruptly dropped on her from a tree overhead. She barely had time to look up and see the pale skin and elongated fangs of a vampire before it knocked her flat. The vampire closed its hands around the wrist of her wand hand and pinned her to the ground as it sank its fangs into her shoulder. Hermione didn't even think. She lashed out and buried the blade of her silver harvesting knife into the vampire's temple. Wrenching herself free, she flung herself to her feet and bolted past the anti-apparition wards. She reappeared and nearly collapsed in the middle of the creek in Whitecroft. It was not an ideal place to reappear. She glanced around dazedly and wondered why on earth it had been the first place she thought of. She was bleeding profusely. Vampire fangs injected anticoagulant venom into the blood at first contact, and Hermione had tore her shoulder badly as she had ripped herself free. Her entire shoulder grew drenched with blood as she stood, trying to regain her bearings. She looked down at her leg. She was bleeding badly there too. She didn't have the energy to apparate again. A car drove by and Hermione ducked awkwardly under the bridge until it passed. She had the supplies she needed to heal herself, but she didn't particularly fancy doing it in the dark under a bridge. She checked the time. It was more than an hour earlier than she was supposed to show up to pick up Draco's missives. She sighed. Knowing him, he'd probably left it the night before anyways. She cast a disillusioning charm on herself, then pressed down hard against her shoulder to slow the bleeding as she limped to the shack. As she had guessed, the scroll was already on the table when she opened the door. She rolled her eyes and stuffed it into her satchel with her less blood-stained hand. Hermione sat heavily in a chair and cast a diagnostic. She had bled a lot. She would start getting lightheaded if she didn't staunch it quickly. She pulled a bandage out of her emergency kit and used a spell to wrap it firmly around her calf. She'd healed the dry trash bite after she fixed her shoulder. She arched her neck and tried to see the gashes. The movement twisted the injury. She hissed and conjured a mirror. The vampire had bitten down on the juncture of her neck and shoulder. When she torn herself free, the fangs had sliced long, deep lacerations over to her collarbone, barely missing her jugular vein and carotid artery. Hermione cut off her shirt and cast a cleansing charm. Using the mirror and awkwardly working in reverse, she crushed and pummeled fresh dittany leaves into her fingers and then stuffed them into the gashes. Dittany wasn't very effective fresh, especially whole, but she didn't have a pestle on hand. She chewed on several leaves as she worked. Holding her bunched up shirt firmly against the gashes with one hand, she set to work mixing together an infusion that could function as a coagulant. She couldn't brew a potion, but she had yarrow and murtlap essence. She combined them with a few practiced flicks of her wand and swallowed it quickly. After a minute, the bleeding in her shoulder began to ease. She was covered in blood, and there was a decent-sized puddle of it accumulating on the floor beneath her. She ignored it. She'd clean up the shack when she was done. She used the mirror to start plucking the dittany leaves out of the gashes, and then she recast a cleansing charm on the area and reappraised the injury. The upside of vampire bites was that they healed easily without causing any scarring. She started near her clavicles where the laceration was the shallowest and began muttering the spell to knit the skin back together. She made it halfway across her shoulder when Draco abruptly apparated into the room. "Hi, Tucson, welcome in." He appeared to blanch slightly when he saw her, and Hermione blushed and immediately wished she hadn't cut her shirt off. Then she snorted, because she was covered in blood. Unless Draco had a weird fetish, he probably wasn't paying attention to what clothes she was or wasn't wearing. "What happened?" he said after staring at her for several seconds. "I was foraging," Hermione said blandly, refocusing on her reflection in the mirror and resuming her healing. "Sorry, I'll clean up the floor before I go." "Are you all right?" he asked. Hermione laughed. She had gotten a lot closer to dying than she had in a long time, and she was slightly faint with blood loss, and having such a question directed at her while she was dripping blood on the floor of his dilapidated building was just strangely hilarious to her. "Well, no," she said, "but it's something I can't fix." Draco grew visibly angry. "I told you to be careful," he finally said. "I have been," Hermione said, her amusement suddenly disappearing. He was the one who said he'd teach her to defend herself and then refused to even lay eyes on her when she finished healing him. "But, as you are aware, there are anti-apparition wards all over England. I ran out of dittany. It's a critical supply for us. I cast detection charms and I tried to leave as soon as I sensed anything. But as you yourself noted, it was the benevolence of fate that I'm alive at this point." Her voice grew bitter. "My luck was due to run out." "Why not just buy it like a normal person?" he asked as though she were thick. "Because," Hermione said, her voice tight with a shrill and slightly mocking edge to it, "I'm a known terrorist. Because perhaps you've forgotten," and she hiccuped, "I don't have any money left." He fell silent and just stood, staring at her for a minute. "What happened?" he asked again. I was foraging in Hampshire. The forest went quiet, so I cast detection spells, but nothing showed up. I decided to leave anyway, though. I was almost out when I got bitten by a guy trash. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Then, when I was driving it off, a vampire attacked me. I killed it and apparated. I don't know why I came to Whitecroft. I didn't mean to, but I lost too much blood to apparate again, and I use all my essence of Dittany, and without Dittany leaves, I can't make blood replenishing potions either, so I had to come here to fix it manually. Hermione's voice was shaking as she finished speaking, and she was on the verge of tears. As she had related what had happened, it abruptly stopped being funny and started being traumatic and horrible and too close. She started hyperventilating as the thought about how close she'd come to dying all alone in a forest. No one would even have known where to look for her, and by the time they'd even thought to, she would have been long dead. She clamped her mouth shut and hiccuped several times as she tried to breathe evenly. I think I'm going into shock, she said. Her voice sounded oddly small and childlike. She swallowed hard. She wanted to cry, but she refused to allow herself to. She'd already cried in front of Malfoy several times. She didn't want him to think she was someone who just cried over everything. She was so angry he was there, that of all the times he decided to show up, it had to be then. She'd wish she'd apparated anywhere else. I'm not dying. The Order is not in crisis, so you can just go. I'll clean up before I leave. You won't even know I was here, she said. It was not the strategic thing to say, but she didn't want to look at him. He'd kissed her and then called her a bitch. He'd let her spend weeks healing him and only thanked her when he was drunk, and then told her he intended to go to a different healer the minute he was sober. He'd cut her off. He'd made her miss him like an idiot, while he'd probably gone and fucked as many high-breasted, curvaceous prostitutes as his heart desired. She hated him, and she didn't want him to see her when she was covered in blood and hysterical and traumatized. Why couldn't he ever leave her alone when she wanted him to? After a minute, she turned back to healing her shoulder in the mirror again. He kept standing and staring at her. In a few minutes, the gashes were closed, and only faint cicatrices remained. They would fade once she had Dittany tincture to apply. She summoned over the other chair and lifted her foot and started unwrapping her leg. Then she caught off her jeans at the knee and dropped them alongside the remains of her shirt in the puddle of the blood. She surveyed the guy trash bite. It was difficult to see all the punctures on the back of her calf. She shifted her hips to get a better view. 2 long gashes and several punctures. She cast a cleansing charm over the area to clear the blood away. None of them were very deep. She didn't think any of it was likely to scar. So it had all been repaired in short order. The room seemed to be rotating slowly. She sat back and closed her eyes for a minute. Then she reopened them and cast a new diagnostic charm on herself. She'd lost a little over a pint of blood, which should have been in an acceptable range of loss, but she was sufficiently underweight that it was over 15% of her blood volume. She blinked at the diagnostic for several moments and conjured a glass of water. Her lips were tingling faintly. She rummaged through her bag, trying to see if she had any food, and found a muesli bar that she had no recollection of. She gulped down the water and set to eating, stubbornly ignoring Draco's continued presence. He was still just standing and staring at her. When she finished her 3rd glass of water and every crumb of the bar, she glanced up at him in irritation. I'm going to be here for a while before I'll be able to apparate, she said as she glared at him. Why can't you apparate? He asked. She stared at him for a moment and then gestured to the floor. Blood loss? I had to walk here from the bridge. There's probably a trail, actually. As I mentioned, I was out of Dittany, so I had no blood replenishing potion on hand in my emergency kit. I have to wait until I feel stable enough to apparate. If I stand up now, I'll probably just faint. Draco appeared to be growing pale with rage. His jaw kept clenching and releasing the way Ron's did when he was on the verge of exploding. He kept staring at her as though he resented her mere existence. He'd clearly managed to get entirely over whatever passing interest he'd had in her. She'd been pining, and he'd apparently spent the last 6 weeks remembering that he hated her, and that he'd always hated her, and that her mudblood existence in the world was an offense to him. He was a far better Occlumens than she was. She'd have to admit to Moody that she'd misstepped and blown her assignment. Her lips trembled. She looked away and started cleaning the blood off the floor with practiced ease. The staining wouldn't come out of her shirt, so she banished it rather than trying to repair it. She glanced up and discovered that Malfoy had apparated without a sound. Her mouth twisted. She hadn't known he could apparate silently. She found herself simultaneously relieved and devastated that he'd actually left. She shook her head sharply and only let herself sob once, very softly, before she turned back to cleaning the floor. While she was rummaging through her satchel for something to transfigure into a shirt, he abruptly reappeared. Blood replenishing potion, he said in a cold voice as he handed a vial to her. She stared down at him. She stared down at it. She recognized Sever's spiky handwriting in the label. She unstopped it and swallowed the contents. The room immediately stopped spinning and her lips stopped tingling. Thank you, she said. She transfigured a piece of cloth into a white t-shirt. After scourgifying her shoulder, arm, and torso, pulled it over her head. Then she gathered all her supplies back into her kit and stood to leave. See, she said, gesturing at the floor. I was never here. He didn't say a word as she walked out the door. That is the end of chapter 42, and we are going to read the final chapter for tonight, chapter 43. Thank you all if you are new. If you want to watch any of the previous episodes of the Good Girls Club, that's where we are in right now. This is the Smut Hut, and we are the Good Girls Club. They are all on YouTube. So if you're like, what the fuck's going on? I need to know more. Go watch all of them. We do it every Saturday. Smutty Saturday, every Saturday. So here we go. Hi, Nuggets. How you doing? A lot, Macarena Pepperino. So, chapter 43 is the last chapter tonight. Flashback 18, September 2002. When Hermione returned to the shack the following week, there was no scroll on the table. There was also no table and no chairs. The little bit of furniture that had been there before was gone. Her stomach dropped, and she felt the doorknob rattle in her hand. She kept staring, willing a scroll to appear. She looked around the rest of the room. Perhaps she'd overlooked something, but the furniture was gone. She walked slowly into the room and glanced around. Maybe he was just busy. Maybe he'd bring it in the evening, she thought nervously. But the furniture was gone. Maybe he'd been injured or killed. It hadn't even occurred to her until just then. He might die, and she wouldn't even know. He'd just disappear, and she'd never see him again. Surely, no, Severus would let her know if Draco died. Besides, the furniture was gone. She stood in the middle of the room, wondering what to do. Surely he wouldn't end his arrangement with the Order just because she'd bled on his secondhand furniture. He'd had his back carved into ribbons to be a spy. Drilling blood into his safe house could not possibly be his limit. Perhaps he just burned the furniture. She turned around one last time and then started for the door. She'd come back in the evening. If there was nothing by the next week, then she'd let herself panic. She wasn't going to let herself panic yet. There might be some other explanation. She was halfway out the door when she heard a pop. She turned and found Malfoy standing in the center of the room. She stared at him, wide-eyed and uncertain. He looked her up and down as though he expected her to be injured again. We should resume training, he said after a moment. Hermione said nothing. She felt torn between a desire to laugh or cry. The corner of her mouth twitched, and she tried to swallow past a hard lump in her throat. Her hand shook faintly as she fought to hold in all the furious things she wanted to say. In her mind, she's thinking this. I've been here every week. You're the one who stopped coming. I didn't even want to drink that night. You made me stay and then punished me for it. Why do you even care? Why are you here? Why are you spying for us? Why can't you just make sense so I can stop wondering if you're redeemable or not? I was here, and you were the one who never came back. But she didn't say anything. She just stood in the doorway. She wanted to turn and leave, to go and try to make sense of why she cared. She cared. She cared. She felt betrayed. He'd given her dire warnings, ordered her to work out, practice dueling, and be careful. He made her paranoid and stressed every time she ventured out to forage for potion ingredients, until she could hardly breathe when she was out there. Until she couldn't even eat the night before because the food tasted like ash and her stomach knotted so tightly with anxiety that she couldn't force it down. He'd made her realize how much she didn't want to die. She didn't want to die. I'm gonna cry. Ugh. She didn't want to die. He told her he'd train her, ridiculed her for not being ruthless enough, and then abandoned her. He didn't abandon the order. I'm gonna cry. He'd only abandoned her. Which should have been fine. It should have been fine with her. It was always only supposed to be about the order. But it had hurt. Every week he hadn't shown up. Felt like being abandoned all over again. Sorry. Was she just that easy to leave behind? Her chest stuttered and her cheekbones ached from the effort it took not to cry. She didn't do anything, didn't say anything. She just stared at him, wide-eyed, and kept swallowing until she felt like she might burst into tears. "All right," she said. "Today? Or is it just a heads up for next week?" "Today," he said. "Unless you have other commitments this morning." She did not have other commitments. She had time. With Padma slowly taking over more and more of Hermione's work, Hermione rarely had other commitments. Unless Kingsley needed her or there was a serious injury, she was completely at Malfoy's disposal. She suspected he knew that. She was a dark arts healer and curse specialist. She had a potions mastery. She had left behind and eventually given up all of her friends to become those things, to become an asset in the war effort. But the contribution the Order most needed from her was for her to mold herself into a femme fatale capable of emotionally manipulating Draco Malfoy into depending on her, to try to take advantage of his lack of intimacy until she owned him. Sometimes it made her so angry she thought she'd die from it. It was all Malfoy's fault. He'd asked for her. He'd done this to them both. But she was currently the only one paying for it. There were moments when she resented him so much it felt like her heart might beat itself into dust within her chest. She stepped back inside the shack and closed the door. "When you escaped the vampire, how did you do it?" he asked after a moment. "It had my arm pinned, so I stabbed it through the temple with my silver harvesting knife," she shrugged, trying not to look at him. It hurt to look at him. He nodded, his eyes never leaving her. "Do you usually have a knife on you?" "Well, it's for harvesting, so yes, it's usually in my satchel." "You should wear it. You should keep your wand in a holster on your arm. Don't you keep your wand in a holster on your arm, don't you?" His gaze dropped down and ran up and down her body as though he were cataloging her. "Well, sometimes," she said, crossing her arms across her chest, uncomfortable under the attention. "It's almost 11 inches long. My forearms aren't that long. Wearing it restricts my arm movement. I either lose my wrist mobility or I can't bend my elbow." She drew her wand from her pocket in her jacket and held it next to her forearm to demonstrate. Draco scowled and rolled his eyes. "That's problematic. Where do you keep it?" "If I have a jacket, I keep it in the inner pocket, and if I don't, then I have it in my satchel or in my pocket." That's not fast enough. If you're attacked, you won't be able to draw it in time. You should at least have a knife. Your clothing is shielding now, isn't it? It is, Hermione said immediately. Everything I wear when I'm foraging has shield charms applied to them. George and others in the hospice safe house who still had hands steady enough to do spell work spent most of their time weaving shield spells into spare clothing for the resistance fighters. Do you prefer cloaks or jackets? He asked after a moment, his tone almost suspiciously casual. Hermione's eyes narrowed. Cloaks are better in the wizarding world. A jacket on a woman tends to signal that she's muggle-born, she said. All right then, he said, drawing his wand from his wrist, but then switching it to his right hand. Let's see if you've improved since last time. Hermione put her satchel down and warded it before entering dueling pose. She'd improved dramatically since they'd last practiced when he'd been injured. She'd exercised to the point that her stamina was decent, and both Kingsley and Moody had drilled her several times. She was also angry enough that she wanted to hex Draco. He actually moved to avoid several of her hexes, and she blocked most of the water he sent her way. Finally, he stopped. You've gotten better, he said. I don't want to die, she said with a shrug, her voice only slightly bitter. Good, he said with a sharp nod. He stashed his wand and reached into his robes. He pulled out a scroll and then a flagon that Hermione immediately recognized as being filled with essence of Dittany. She gasped and held out her hands without thinking. Essence of Dittany required such vast quantities of Dittany leaves, it was rare that she had any of it. They'd gotten a supply of it when the Order had raided the Cursed Division, but she used almost all of it in healing the prisoners. What was left she used to neutralize the venom in his runes. She hadn't been able to afford to buy or produce more after that. A single drop required a bushel of leaves. She usually made her Dittany into powder or tinctures instead. The efficacy was lower, but her foraging supplies lasted longer that way, stretched to heal more people. Don't go into Hampshire again, he said. There are hundreds of vampires there. You were lucky to have survived. She hesitantly accepted the flagon. Is this going to expose you? She asked, running her hands over the glass longingly. This is a suspicious quantity. An individual couldn't use this much in a lifetime. He smirked dismissively. I'm a general in the Dark Lord's armies. I can ask for anything I want. Those who question it tend to find their tongues missing. Hermione blanched and Draco rolled his eyes. I'm being facetious, Granger. I've never cut out anyone's tongue, suffice to say. I'm not going to do anything that risks blowing my cover just because of you. He sneered at her as he shoved the scroll of information into her hands. Keep practicing. He vanished soundlessly. Hermione stared at the empty space for several minutes before she left. When she got back to Grimmauld, she superstitiously divvied the essence of Dittany into dozens of tiny vials and hid them carefully. Most Order members were too ignorant about potions to notice or wonder if Hermione suddenly had an endless supply of it. But Padma would know. They'd been trying to invent ways to stretch their meager supply of Dittany for weeks. Malfoy was quiet and surly when he trained her. He ignored her questions and only spoke to scold her angrily when she did something wrong. She would have almost thought he hated her, except every time she walked in the door, he instantly appeared and looked as though he were bracing himself to find her injured. His eyes ran over her from head to toe, as if he was reassuring himself. The dueling sessions kept getting longer and longer. Hermione pretended not to notice. Several weeks later, Malfoy pulled out a shielded cloak. She looked it over carefully. All my clothing is already shielded. She held her cloak in front of herself and found that it was perfectly sized for her health. This is shielded with a manticore blood. She looked over at him sharply. Does that mean you killed it? No. It's surprisingly difficult to come up with a good excuse for killing them, but it seems that mine is strangely lethargic. McNair cannot understand why, he said with a smirk. You're bleeding it? Hermione said, looking at the cloak again. He nodded. They don't do well in cold climates. Perhaps it will come to an unfortunate end this winter. If I'm lucky, it will mature enough to produce venom before succumbing to the cold. I hope you're not torturing it, Hermione said, eyeing him. It's sentient, and even if it weren't, every living thing should be treated humanely. I'm not torturing it, although describing it as sentient just because it can speak is highly generous, Draco said with a faint sneer. All it does is croon about who wants to eat me alive. If you were keeping me prisoner and draining me of my magical abilities, I'd croon similarly, Hermione said. Draco laughed mirthlessly. Thank you for the cloak, Hermione said after she looked it over carefully. It was beautifully made. It had temperature regulating charms woven into it so she could wear it all year round. And it was lined with dozens of undetectably expanded pockets for her to stash things inside. The hem was charmed not to be tripped on. Even without the Manticore blood protection, the cloak had to be worth a small fortune in craftsmanship. Consider it my thanks for healing my back, he said without looking at her. She looked over at him, and he stared determinedly out the window. Are they? She hesitated. Did the scar tissue set properly? You never came when I came to check on them. They're fine, he said in a stiff voice. Physically, I can barely feel them. I had no need for further attention. His jaw was rolling slightly, rippling as he clenched it. Hermione stared at him for a moment before dropping her eyes back down to the cloak. Well, that's good, she said. I hadn't done the procedure to that extent before. I was worried. Don't be! I have no need for the concern of someone like you. Hermione stared at him wide-eyed. He balled his hands into fists as he stared at her. I just meant, she started. Just back off, Granger, he said in a hard voice. He wrenched a scroll out of his robes and dropped it onto the ground before vanishing. Hermione picked up the scroll thoughtfully, tapping her chin after she stashed everything in her satchel. She left the shack and walked toward the creek deep in thought. What had he said about the influence of the runes? They don't countermand my own behavior, but it's as though new elements have been written in. It's easier to be ruthless, somewhat harder to dissuade myself from impulses. Not that I had much distracting me before, but now everything else feels less consequential. That's what Draco told her about. She had the runic vow memorized. She spent so many evenings staring at it, unhesitating, cunning, unfailing, ruthless, and unyielding, driven to succeed. But what he was driven to succeed in was unsated, left to his discretion. He wanted her. She was almost certain of it. He was currently torn between his determination to push her away and his desire to have her. That was why he had been so enraged that she had been injured. He couldn't dissuade himself to the point of not caring if she died, but he was determined not to give in to wanting her and compromising himself. The Malfoys were possessive like dragons, Severus had said. He knew what she was doing, what she had been sent to do. She could see it in the resentful way he stared at her. There was a vicious rage in his eyes that hadn't been there before. But he'd become cornered by the realization that she would likely die if he didn't train her. The vampire attack had been remarkably good luck. If she tried to stage it, it couldn't have come out any better. If she'd kept him near her, it was only a matter of time before he'd finally slip. He wanted her too much to keep holding back. The runes would assure it. When that happened, Hermione sighed. When that happened, she'd own him. Unless he was so desperate to free himself of his obsession that he killed her. In some moments, when she felt his eyes on her as they were dueling, it felt like a coin toss between the two, as though he were constantly weighing the options. Confident as she had been in his attention, confident as she had become in his attention, she wasn't confident enough to say whether she would survive it. There was so much about Draco Malfoy that she did not know or understand. When she looked at him, she could only wonder whether he was the type of person who destroyed the things he loved. Whatever it was he wanted, his motive for spying. He'd killed countless people already to try obtaining it. If he thought she was in the way, she might be next. Unhesitating, cunning, unfailing, ruthless, and unyielding, driven to succeed. Hermione twisted the strap of her satchel as she stood, thinking. She needed to prioritize training Padma during any spare time she had. Padma had a decent aptitude for healing. She stayed calm under pressure and had a good head for memorizing all the spells and variations. She did have trouble with precision needed in certain healing wand work, and she tended to rely on rote memorization rather than embracing the creativity necessary for inventing counter curses. But Hermione hoped that with Poppy's help, Padma would be able to replace Hermione sufficiently. Hermione had started taking Padma foraging with her. Someone else needed to know how to gather the local potion supplies. With winter approaching, they needed to try to stock up. But Hermione was careful not to let Draco know that she had a foraging partner. If he found out, he'd probably stop training her. She foraged with Padma on Thursday mornings. Tuesdays, she still went alone, but more cautiously. Hermione needed to have everything in place before she tried to progress things further with Draco. She watched the water sliding beneath the bridge and wondered if she was stalling. She didn't want to die. The past few weeks, she'd found herself thinking about dying almost as much as she thought about Draco. After feeling the vampire's fangs sinking into her shoulder, she was abruptly confronted with the fact that on a primal level, she had an absolute determination not to die. She hadn't realized how overwhelming the drive was. Rationally, she had always regarded dying as something she could face. For a good reason, she would gladly die. But the instant she felt the terror of hands pinning her to the ground and teeth sinking into her flesh, the instinct to fight her way free and kill anything that got in the way had swallowed her mind. She hadn't realized how her survival instinct would supersede everything. She hadn't realized how much she didn't want to die. But if it came down to her and Draco, she probably would die. He could kill her so easily. Another corpse for his body count. She'd probably bleed together with all the rest of his dead after a while. She smiled bitterly to herself as she thought about the contrast between them. Hermione's body count was a representation of her failures. Everyone she hadn't saved. Draco's body count was an illustration of his achievement, everything he was and why he was valuable to both Voldemort and the Order. Their relationship, whatever it was and wherever it was headed, felt like some cruel form of irony. It was as though they were the reverse of each other. Yin and yang. They circled inexorably. Somehow the war had tied them together. She apparated back to Grimmauld Place and went to find Kingsley. Generally, she spoke solely to Moody, but Alistair was in Ireland, training new recruits with Remus and Tonks. Kingsley was standing in the war room, staring at a map on the wall. Hermione knew he was aware of her presence, but he didn't immediately acknowledge her. "Kingsley?" Hermione said as she closed the door softly. "Could I have a word?" He turned with a sharp pivot, his robes fluttering around him, and cast several privacy wards on the room before he spoke. "Granger," he said, "new information?" Hermione unbuckled her satchel and handed the scroll to him. Kingsley unfurled it and ran his eyes across it for a minute before stashing it inside his robes and looking at Hermione again. "Thank you for the follow, Rhino. Do you need to speak with me about something, Granger?" Hermione stared at him for a moment. Ever since Draco had demanded her, Kingsley had stopped using her first name. She had noticed he referred to Harry and Ron and most of the other members by the Order by their first names, but he always used her surname to address her now, to impersonalize her to himself, she had concluded. "I think Severus has spoken to you and Moody about his concerns regarding Malfoy," she said. Kingsley nodded, his expression betraying nothing. "Yes, we've spoken." Hermione nodded. "The way things are going, I'm beginning to think there's at least a chance Malfoy may kill me." Kingsley looked at her squarely and straightened his robes. Are you asking for us to pull you out, Granger? Hermione looked away and stared at a still life painting on the wall. No, we need the information. We'd probably all be dead by now if not for Malfoy. I want to know what I should prioritize while I'm training Padma to replace me. She doesn't have 2 years like I did, and there is still too much basic healing she needs to learn before I can teach her advanced dark arts healing. And then there's the potions and foraging. I'm just not sure. She's not as driven as I was. I know she wanted to stay in the field with Pavarti, so I need to know what you and Moody regard as the highest priorities. Kingsley was silent for a minute. I'll speak with Alistair and look over the hospital's reports. Perhaps make a list of what areas we have no redundancy in. I'll have an answer next week. All right, Hermione said, nodding. Her voice sounded stilted and mechanical. Granger, tell me, what exactly is the strategy you're trying to employ? She looked back over at Kingsley and felt tired. He wants me. He's obsessive, and he wants me. But he knows what I'm doing. I can tell by the way he looks at me that he knows. I still don't know what his long-term goals are. He doesn't ever say anything that gives it away. If I keep drawing him in and it turns out I interfere with his original ambition, he may resort to killing me. But if he doesn't kill me, according to Severus, the Malfoys tend toward being both obsessive and possessive. I don't think he'll abandon the order at that point. Willingness seems critical, and he knows that mine is conditional on the order's survival. Then she shrugged. Or I could be wrong, and he'll turn on the order, which is what Severus fears. I honestly don't know. I don't know how to use people like this. Kingsley was silent. If he's growing obsessed with you, that's more than I had expected, he said, glancing over at the table and resting his fingers on the edge and tapping thoughtfully. Hermione felt as though she should have some kind of reaction to the words, offense, or satisfaction, or something. But she felt nothing. It was as though her heart were slowly compacting inside of her chest, growing smaller and harder day by day. I'm not. She started and then paused and pressed her lips together. She twisted her head slightly as she felt tension in her neck begin radiating down her shoulders. I'm not lying to him, Kingsley. I'm not being insincere. The emotional connection between us is real. Kingsley's fingers stilled, and he studied her with slightly narrowed eyes. I hope you're not becoming compromised by him, Granger. The order is depending on you to stay on mission. Hermione nodded stiffly. My loyalty will always be the order first. Kingsley's expression did not ease. Harry, you know I can only keep him away from the worst fights if I know which ones they'll be. Hermione flinched. I know. I'm doing everything I can, Kingsley. I'm doing the very, very best that I can. I'd never do anything that would risk Harry. Keep it up then, Kingsley said, turning back to the map on the wall. Hermione stared at his back for several moments before she turned and rested her hand on the doorknob. As she gripped it, she laughed quietly. Something else you want to say, Granger? Kingsley's voice had a slight edge to it. Hermione glanced over her shoulder. His back was still to her. I was just realizing, she said in a low voice. If I succeed, you'll use me to control Malfoy the same way you're able to use Harry to control me. It almost makes me feel sorry for him. Kingsley was silent for a moment. Well, he'll deserve it considerably more than you do. That's a brutal end. That is a brutal end, guys. I'm so sorry. Kingsley's a dick. Kingsley's an absolute fucking dick. I forgot how much of a prick Kingsley is. Oh my god. Fuck, I completely forgot how much of an asshole he is. What the fuck is right? You know, Moody's also an asshole, but I think Kingsley's worse. I forgot. So that is the end of chapter 43. Oh, God. So I want to make some notes that are very important. He can get fucked. That was meaner than I think Alistair Moody ever was. I think that was meaner and more degrading than Alistair ever was to her. And I completely forgot about it because there's just so much shit that happens. But let me just say, I think these chapters, and I know that we're not out of the brutal parts, but I hope you see the symmetry of the story that is beginning to unfold. I hope you guys are seeing that there's some real, beautiful, poetic, darkly poetic, complex poetry of all this unfolding slowly. That she's realizing, like she just said, that they are using Harry, her love for Harry, just like she's using Draco's whatever, we don't know what he feels for her exactly yet, for her. And it's really, really, in my opinion, this unfolding of that yin and yang she talked about the duality of their mutual loneliness, their isolation, their needing to feel something, the idea that he's this bloodthirsty killer and he has a body count of his achievements, but her failures is a stack of bodies too. Like, there's such beautiful symmetry between a healer and a killer. It's so dark and so fucked up that in some ways the greatest healer of the Order of Phoenix has the most in common with the greatest Death Eater of Voldemort's whole fucking fascist regime. It's insane. It's so beautiful, and I'm so glad you guys are finally seeing it. Like, it's finally happening. Oh my God, it's so good. I did it more. Okay, wait, let me catch up. So what did you guys think about the Graham Montague reveal too? Haley, real quick, what was the song that played just before this one? What is the song that played just before this one? I don't have my headset on. So I've been putting on just like, I put on Fire with like deep radiating music. I don't know what it was playing though. Oh, so manipulative. Some people, I swear, they just go out here controlling people through unscrupulous means. This is also what I'll say, and I've been trying to hearken this because I know that in volume 1, right, we still don't know. The story is still unfolding. I told you guys it's slow, but in volume 1, first of all, I want to hearken back to a little like. There's a lot of things we can harken back that you might not have pieced together. One of which is that Hermione in isolation, right, is constantly working out. And we learned that she learned that from Malfoy. So I thought that's a nice little thing, that when she was in isolation and when she was in Malfoy Manor, she remembers she's working out all the time. And she doesn't remember where she learned it from. She thinks she learned it from a cousin, but it wasn't. It was actually from Malfoy. We also remember another little like Easter egg from volume 1 is that also when Malfoy was being tortured by Voldemort with the Cruciatus Curse, he had those hand tremors, and he watched Hermione heal those hand tremors. Harken back to volume 1, where she's watching him massage her hands after she goes through ligaments and her hands are shaking, and she's like, I wonder where he learned this massage technique. He had learned it from Hermione. So there's so much like that. There's all these little, and then this Graham Montague is one of the biggest things to connect from the first and second book that we've discovered as of yet. That Graham Montague locks onto Hermione and becomes obsessive with her because of this situation that unfolded with the brain damage. So that's why he is absolutely one-track mind obsessed with getting at Hermione through Astoria in volume 1. Why he was like losing his mind to be close to her and then inevitably attack her. And then we know Draco in volume 1 disemboweled him in front of an audience at St. Mungo's Hospital, outing himself as the High Reeve. So it's really, the story is layering itself. It's layering itself like a lasagna. But they're both, I also want to say, they're both being manipulated and also manipulating, which I know that in volume 1, and that's why I really love volume 2 so much, because we're seeing that we know Draco, we don't really know Draco, but we know that Draco is a monster of some kind, and we know that he is dark, and we know he's manipulative, and we know he's dangerous, and we know those things. But in volume 1, Hermione feels a little bit like a lamb to slaughter. And even though she's so strong and she's so powerful and she's trying so hard to survive the absolute torment she goes through from volume 1, she feels very much like singularly a victim, which she is. She still is. Don't get me wrong, she still is. But it's nice that you guys are seeing that Hermione's teeth are there, even if it's not the same kind of teeth that Malfoy has, but they both have teeth. And I also really want to make note about her missing him, needing him, and it goes beyond, because she doesn't want to. She doesn't want to miss him or need him or feel for him, but she does. And that's also really important too. And put clothes on, yes. Yeah, there's no fire. This one's just ambient music. Oh, okay. I didn't realize that it was music. It says it's deep music, insomnia, sleep therapy. Oh God, I'm sorry. Sorry, I was being, okay. Well, hopefully the music wasn't too distracting. I'm sorry. I shall have to re-listen to this. I miss a lot having more than one stream. No worries, Darius. I actually love the music. Really? Oh, good. Did you like it? Because I'm sorry. I was being my head was feeling like overstimulated. My hair was heavy. I had to take my headset off. But if you guys like this, I'll save this one and we could play it. I just don't want it. I don't want it to be overstimulating if there's music. Inverse thematic symmetry is delicious. It's beautiful. The foreshadowing was amazing. And I just want to, and we're going to wrap up this episode of the Good Girls Club. But I think it's just what I really, really, really like and what's really beautiful about this world. And please, if you have questions, DM me. You can always DM me. You can always, excuse me. You can always DM me anytime you need to. If you have any like questions, concerns, you can also post them into book whores, and you can also post them into no, what am I doing? You could also post them into what am I trying to say? You could also post them in book whores or in the comment section of the episode itself. But a lot of people have just been DMing me, which is fine. But it's the universe is complicated. These characters are complicated, and there is no one that I feel like has no blood on their hands of some kind, and that is all I will say. Before I go, what chapter is the final book of volume 1? I believe it was 28 as well. I do not know how many more chapters we have left of volume 2. I really don't. I feel like we're getting close though. I could be wrong, but I feel like we're getting pretty close to volume 3. I think we're getting close, but honestly, I don't know. Volume 2 is the longest of the series. Volume 1 and Volume 3 are shorter. I can't help but be an active listener to music, so I was listening to it a bit more than you at first, but it was basically the same thing the whole time. So it's okay, good. I'm sorry. I usually just do fire crackling. It has a fire crackling in the video. I thought I just clicked on the first one. I'm gonna have to post a video of my mind dump. Please post a video. Ask questions if you ever have anything. I mean, there's so much to go over with this book. I know it's crazy that we're this deep and it still feels like we're scratching the surface, but there's so much more. Okay, I think we're 20 chapters off. Okay, well, chapter 3 is shorter. I mean, volume 3 is shorter. Volume 1 is shorter. This one is where almost the entire story unfolds. We're building up the Jenga tower. So without further ado, these 3 chapters will be on YouTube in this episode of the Good Girls Club. Thank you for listening. Thank you for enjoying. I'm so grateful if you were lurking, if you followed during this, thank you so much. And we're gonna listen to the second act, yes. And we're gonna listen to our beautiful theme song from Emma. I love you guys. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you on the other side of this mud hut, baby.
I can't put it down, it's my new addiction. It's all in my head, but I want non-fiction. I don't like the world, but I like fantasy. Fairies, fucking girls, and they're pretty. Highly, do you like to read? I wrote this so you'd sleep with me. It's like 199 degrees. When I go to the smart hut, SMUTHUT. All this filth I've gotta read. Mass men crossing boundaries brings me to my fucking knees. SMUTHUT. Throbbing, swelling, pulsing pain. Big fat tits stick in between. SMUTHUT. SMUTHUT. Draco fucked Hermione. SMUTHUT. Draco fucked Hermione. I wake up alone staring at my ceiling. I try not to care, so I just start reading. Sits in the cut chair, he watches watches me finish. He just likes to stare, and my God, he's British. Her job's to satisfy his needs. Those man bets I just wanna squeeze. Feels like I'm gonna sneeze. Squid isn't pee-pee, won't somebody breathe me? S-M-U-T-H-U-T, all this filth I've gotta read. Mass men crossing boundaries, brings me to my fucking knees. S-M-U-T-H-U-T, throbbing, swelling, pulsing peen. Big fat tits stick in between. S-M-U-T-H-U-T. S-M-U-T-H-U-T, Draco fucked Hermione. S-M-U-T-H-U-T, Draco fucked Hermione. Yes, he did, he fucked her real nice. Yes, he did, he fucked her twice. Yes, he did, he fucked her a lot. He fucked in the shed and he fucked in the smart babe. Sorry about that.